Throughout the majority of the Witcher books, Emhyr var Emreis serves as an antagonistic force. In fact, it is his actions and plans, largely, that drive the plot forward against our beloved characters. Emhyr is the one whose armies invade the northern kingdoms and create the setting of destruction present in the books. He is ruthless, calculating, and pragmatic. Everything he does for himself, and by extension, his dynasty and empire. And it is these factors that perfectly encapsulate the character of Emhyr var Emreis, from his introduction as Duny until the very end of The Lady of the Lake. It is in the closing chapters of that book that something changes, that something inside of Emhyr shifts. And it is because of that shift that our protagonists and their story is not lost, even though they were essentially defeated. Let us explain that shift and understand precisely why Emhyr let Ciri free, and why he let Geralt and Yennefer live. The character of Emhyr is an interesting one. Though he ends up the emperor of a vast empire, we originally meet him as a lowly exile, and a cursed one at that, being forced into the appearance of a hedgehog. To make a very long story short, Emhyr, who was then known as Duny, had met the daughter of Queen Calanthe of Cintra, the Princess Pavera, and the two had seemingly fallen in love. The thing is that, at some point, many years before, Duny had helped save the life of Calanthe's husband and was therefore owed a life debt, specifically to be paid through the law of surprise. That surprise turned out to be Pavera herself, and so at the time of the princess's 15th birthday, which served as a feast to find royal suitors, Duny appeared, claimed the right to marry her through the law of surprise, and after a brief altercation with Calanthe, was eventually allowed to marry the princess. Now, during that altercation, Calanthe was a bit upset at the potential of a hedgehog marrying her daughter and ordered her guests to attack Duny. Geralt defended him, and eventually Duny and Pavera explained that they were in love and had been seeing each other for some time now. Duny, in thanks to Geralt, offers him anything he would like, and Geralt, in his absolute genius and not believing in fate, invokes the law of surprise as well. Pavera, it turns out, had been pregnant, and that child turned out to be Ciri. Going back to Emhyr now, he had known who Pavera was when they had originally met and fallen in love, and he had known that she was owed to him through the law of surprise. Not only that, but the girl was only around 13 years old when he approached her, and 15, as I mentioned earlier, when they got permission to marry, though she was already pregnant by that point. To give you a perspective, Emhyr was already in his teens when he was given the life debt, making him about 30 years old at the time of Pavera's 15th birthday feast. This is the first piece of the character of Emhyr. He is a pragmatist. He did not truly love Pavetta, simply seeing her as a means to an end, and therefore did not care about the disgusting nature of what he was doing. The second is what ultimately happened to Princess Pavera. Duny had conspired with a certain Vilgefortz to bring his wife and daughter, Ciri, to his home of Nilfgaard, after faking all of their deaths in order to start fresh and reclaim the Nilfgaardian throne. Pavetta refused and left Ciri behind, and following a heated argument with Duny, she fell overboard their ship and drowned, leaving Ciri orphaned and under the wing of her grandmother, which is the state we find them in when Nilfgaard invades. Because of what happened with Pavetta, Duny was brought to Nilfgaard alone, where he abandoned this identity and consolidated his power as Emhyr var Emreis, becoming the Emperor of Nilfgaard and restoring the throne that had been lost by his father when he was a young boy. Emhyr planning this scheme with Vilgefortz and ultimately causing the death of his wife is the second piece of this puzzle. And so, without him even ascending to the throne yet, he has orchestrated his own marriage with a teenager over the span of over a decade, tried to fake the death of his own family for political purposes, and ultimately caused his daughter to be orphaned. All of these things Emhyr has done because he sees them as means to an end, that end being his personal power and the future of his rule. Nonetheless, under that surface, there are some cracks, and for example, he was deeply upset at the death of Pavetta, even though she had only been a pawn. Perhaps because what happened to her he had experienced firsthand, which is something to keep in mind. In the main books, having established himself as emperor, Emhyr does what he thinks is best for Nilfgaard. The best example of this, and the main premise of his character in the books, is that he tries to take Ciri, his own daughter, and marry her in order to legitimize Nilfgaard's rule over Sintra, and, most important of all, produce an heir for his dynasty with Ciri's prophesied elder blood. He invades with his armies, he sends mercenaries, he manipulates sorceresses, conspires with some terrible people, all in the attempt of marrying his own daughter in order to secure a powerful heir for his dynasty. Because, remember, Ciri's father was known to be Duni, and almost no one knew that Duni was actually Emhyr. As he plans these things and sends orders for them to be carried out, he can only see and understand the gains that will come out of them, and not see the consequences of them actually being carried out. While everything I've mentioned is depraved to no end, he sees everything he does as what he calls reason of state. This is the side of Emhyr, the politician. Despite the depravity of his plans, however, Emhyr's saving grace is that he is not inhuman enough to carry them out personally. Thinking of plans or sending orders for them to be carried out is very different from seeing their execution from up close, or carrying them out yourself. Towards the very end of the Witcher books, in The Lady of the Lake, Emhyr can finally have everything he has asked for throughout the saga. Ciri is right there at Stygga Castle, Yennefer and Geralt too. While Ciri had evaded him for so long, the plan that he had conceived of years ago can finally come into fruition. As Ciri lays her eyes upon him and upon the Nilfgaardians, and at the thought of being separated from her Geralt and her Yennefer, the girl cannot contain her tears anymore. Her adventures and survival throughout the books had seen her turn from girl into killer, and yet that very thought broke her deeply. She wept, and ultimately, the Emperor, Emhyr var Emreis, stopped. This dark man whose face had awakened strange and confusing memories. With a sharp order, he ordered her loose. Ciri sniffed and wiped her eyes with her sleeve. Seeing the Emperor approach, she stifled a sob and proudly raised her head. Although, even at the time, she realized how ridiculous she must look. Emhyr watched her for a long time, without a word. Then he approached and reached for her. Ciri, whose reactions to such movements were to instinctively recoil, did not react this time to her surprise. Even greater was her surprise to find that the contact with this man was not distasteful. He touched her hair, as if to count the snowy strings. He touched her cheek, his fingertips running along the old scar. Then he hugged her, cuddling her close to his chest, stroking the back of her head, and she, shaking and crying uncontrollably, let him. "A strange thing, fate," she heard him whisper faintly. "Goodbye, my daughter." While Geralt had told him of the monstrosity of his plan, it was seeing his daughter for himself that broke the Emperor. Years of planning, searching and maneuvering led him to victory, to the victory of the monster over the human. And yet, at seeing Ciri, Emhyr understood how wrong he had been, and it pained him deeply, though he did not show it. With everything he had done, he had lost the opportunity to have a real loving relationship with his only daughter. Yet he still had the power not to make things even worse, to let her be and let her be happy. Ciri's happiness would be her freedom alongside her new parents, and as such, there is nothing for the Emperor but to bid his daughter farewell, leave, and try to be better from then on. This is something you can see with how he treats the character of False Ciri. False Ciri was a girl taken by Nilfgaard because she looked like the real Ciri, and was presented as the real Ciri to the Emperor. Although Emhyr immediately knew it wasn't his daughter, he eventually declared her the lost princess Cirilla. However, as they were getting ever closer to finding the real one, Emhyr had to decide what to do with False Ciri. Killing her would have been the easy option, and perhaps what he would have done in the past. But after meeting with her, he gradually grew to care for the girl and her well-being. He asked to give her anything she wanted, but to his surprise, all she wanted was to continue being Ciri. Having let the real one go after Stygga Castle, Emhyr granted her wish, married her, and made her empress, thus fulfilling the first part of his original plan and legitimizing his rule over Sintra, without forcing himself over the life of his own daughter. Here too, Emhyr grows compassionate. Being the empress, Emhyr finally said dully, is not easy, contrary to appearances. I do not know if I'll be able to love you. She nodded to indicate that she knew this. He saw a tear on her cheek. Just like then, In the castle Stygga, he felt like a sliver of glass was struck in his heart. He hugged her, pressing her hard against his chest, stroking her hair which smelled like lilies. "My poor child," he said in an unnatural voice. "My poor reason of state." A massive thank you to my channel members, and thank you very much for watching.